Hello and welcome back to another video. This is sort of the part 2 of what I don't want to call part 1 and part 2 of my podcast video, but is the easiest way to kind of explain what's going on. I mentioned in my last podcast episode that I had too much to share because I hadn't filmed in like 2 months, and I didn't want to do like a really long video because it would have been at least 3 hours long, if not longer. So I was like, I'll split it in half. I have more than enough for 2 separate episodes. And yeah, so this is the second half of it, I guess. And in the next podcast episode, it will kind of be back to normal of, since filming this video, what have I worked on? Which will be a combination of probably these projects and the ones from last time. An unnecessary explanation in some ways. What do I want to say? So we are losing the light, which I know people are probably sick of hearing everyone in the Northern Hemisphere say in a podcast video, but it is so true. Like, filming in the afternoon is just not really something that's easily done anymore. So the light here will start to fade. I've got my ring light on the other side, so I might just have to adjust as the video goes. But so it's not ideal, but it should be good enough to still be able to show everything off. What am I wearing? I am wearing the No Sweat shirt by Park Williams. So this was a test knit I did back in like April, May, where I used Holst Coast held double in the colour Old Gold, I think it's called. And it's just, it's such a cozy little jumper, and it has a hood, which I'm not going to wear because it's not that cold. But yeah, so it's just like a really comfy hoodie, perfect for just at home. If it gets a bit chilly and you don't want to turn your heating on yet, this is nice. But it's also good enough to actually be able to go outside, especially like it's cooler now and I can wear this without needing a winter jacket if the sun is shining. If it's after the sun is set, it's not going to be warm enough and I'll need my winter jacket. But it's just really nice that a lot of these things that I finished in like I said, April, May time, I haven't been able to wear because it was already way too warm at that point. So it's nice to get to wear them now. And I've said before I would totally knit this pattern again, and I'd love to do it in multiple colours because it's just a very staple cozy piece. It's also, the sleeves I made quite long. I knew I wanted it to be a cozy little hoodie. And normally I knit my sleeves to here because it's practical for when I'm working or doing anything. But when I want to be cozy, I want longer sleeves, and these are the perfect length. So yeah, it's a pattern I'd highly recommend knitting. And it is like the wrong side is outward facing. So these are all the purl stitches. But you knit it the other way around, so you don't have to purl. Well, you do have to purl occasionally because it's got like short rows and stuff, and for the hood, you have to purl for the hood, but you don't have to like purl the whole thing. Yeah, so that's what I'm wearing, and let's get into what I finished recently. I say recently, I think I finished most of these back in like September, early October. It's been a while. And there's not that many to show because of splitting the video like in 2. But let's start. The first thing that I'm going to show are 2 pairs of socks, both test knits. And we'll start with the happy nice one first. So these are the Looks Like Rain socks. Aren't they cute? So Colourwork socks, I'll talk about this one first because it was the first one I did. So the beauty with test knitting anything like socks and mittens is you have a shorter deadline, but you typically only have to knit one of them because the second one's typically made in exactly the same way. So I did this one first. I used Filcolana Arwetta Classic as my contrast colour, the blue and the green. and this yellow, and also my black main color for this sock, but not for this one. So this yarn here is Sisu by Sandnes Garn. It's the color that I used for my Telegram cardigan for like the button band and ribbing and things like that. And I bought 100 grams just in case. I wasn't sure 50 grams was going to be enough, and 50 grams was like perfect for that cardigan. So I had a whole 50 gram skein left. And then when I got accepted for this test knit, which I was so happy about, because I'd seen pictures of these before the test knit call came up, and I was like, I really want to test these. I really want to test these. And then to get chosen was just really lovely. But so when I did get chosen, I looked at my yarn. I was like, well, I have plenty of different colors for the contrast that I can use. But I was like, well, 50 grams of Sisu isn't going to be enough for me. I've got big, relatively big feet. But I did have, because after finishing the first one, I had 50 grams. I had like 19 grams left at the end. Wasn't going to be enough for the second one. But I had a black skein of Arwetta Classic, which I used for this one. So Sisu is a bit thicker than Arwetta Classic. And so you can kind of, when I hold them up correctly, you can kind of see this one's a bit more like a grey black, and this is like a true black. I don't care. I'm just happy that I didn't have to buy any yarn for this, and that I've used up a load of both of the skeins of the black colour, and didn't use up much of the other colours at all. But they were really fun to knit because, you know, you've got the colour work, which is so much fun. And then you've got a heel flap and gusset. It's a slip stitch one. And then I always find the decreases, like after the heel flap, that's when I love knitting socks. I hate this part. I like the heel flap or like doing the heel. I love the decreases. I love the knitting for a while before you do the toe. And the fact that you then still also have colour work at the end, delicious. But I've seen some people who didn't, so you might be able to see the rain is 2 different colours. And that's how you're meant to knit it, as in like that's what the pattern says you should do, so that you don't have to work with 3 colours in a row. And I was like, I really don't care about it being like fully consistent. I'll do what the knitting pattern says. But some people did choose to knit with 3 colours in a row, where you then just have to be careful with your tension. And some people even did like the gum boots in a different colour to the umbrella, which I was like, I admire people who did it, but I'm not going to do that. Because I still think it's cute the way it is, and I like how poppy these are. And then these ones are a bit more subtle, which is nice because this is like the black yarn. And this is the more like, I'm not really fully black. I've got a bit of like grey in me. And so it's nice that this is a muted green. I could have used a bright green, but I didn't want to. So yeah, would highly recommend these socks. They were so much fun to knit. I'll definitely be making them again, but probably not for myself because I don't think I need more than 1 pair. It will just be as presents for people because I think it's adorable. And they're fun to knit. So, you know, fingering weight socks isn't always the best present because of how long they take, but they're so much fun. It's worth it. And what else did I want to say? Oh, she also has a pattern with like trees and a tent and I think a camper van or something, which I think are also adorable and I will be making in the future. So that's the first one. Can you see? Happy? Loved them? I'm about to ruin all that happiness by talking about the next project. So, like I said, that was a test knit. Ran really smoothly. It was, I don't think there was really anything wrong with the pattern. I think there were minor suggestions that we made. But this next one, this is, I think, one of the worst test knits I've ever done. Not just because there were mistakes with the pattern, which is fine, that's why you have a test knit, but in some ways it was also like a lot of these things could have been caught by a tech editor and a grader. And not something I expect for every designer to do because it's expensive. But for this designer, let me show them first because they're beautiful in my opinion. These are the Through Shadows socks by Melody Hoffman. Now Melody Hoffman's a pretty big designer. I don't think she's, you know, as big as like Andrea Mario Petite Knit, but she is relatively big. So I kind of was shocked at how bad the test knit went. But let's talk about the yarn first, because the yarn is still happy. It brings joy. For the main colour, I used Plötulopi in the colour Oatmeal, held with Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the colour Hazel, and my contrast colour was like Light Ash Heather, I think, by Plötulopi by Istex, and the mohair I used, I think, was the colour Putty. Could be Cloud. I think it's Putty though, because I think Cloud is slightly more pink. But I started with a 100-gram plate of the Oatmeal colour, and I still have a decent amount left. So I can still use this for something else, which is nice. But I used an entire 25-gram skein of the mohair. I had another one, literally like one worked out perfectly for me. And the like Plötulopi for the contrast colour, I used nearly nothing. I think it was like 2 or 3 grams. And this is how much I still have left of the mohair. So you can see I didn't use that much for the contrast colour. And these flowers are embroidered on later, which was really fun. I'd never done that before. And yeah, they're just really cozy kind of house socks. That's what they're intended for. They're not intended for outdoors. And I did actually hold the mohair double for the heel just to give it a bit of extra strength. And yeah, like how they look and everything and how they did knit up at the end was lovely. And now let's talk about the knitting experience from when the test knit started. So like I said with socks, you typically have a shorter deadline. Wow, it's really getting dark now. You typically have a shorter deadline because you just need to knit one and it's a small thing, and especially with these socks, I think I knitted mine on 3.75mm needles or something, so they went by quickly. Even though they are quite like big, oversized house socks, still went really quickly and they were a pleasure to knit. What wasn't a pleasure is the fact that we got sent the pattern, got told, I think it was like we had about 2 weeks time, and the deadline was like the 1st of September. Fine. So I did my swatch and met gauge originally with 2 strands of Plötulopi, no mohair. And I was like, okay, cool, let's get started. Started knitting. I think I pretty much finished the chart for the leg. And I was like, these are huge. Like, I think they were like this much wider. Like, these are already quite oversized, but they were going to be even wider. And the measurement given of like the final circumference of the leg did not match up with what I was getting. I then checked, given how many stitches we have, given the gauge that we're knitting at, what should the circumference be, and it was way bigger than what it should have been. And so this is when other test knitters as well realized this. They were like, why are these socks so big? And a couple of us then said, look, based on the math, what we're doing is correct and the pattern's wrong. You can't get that circumference with this gauge. You have to either have fewer stitches or a tighter gauge. And so, you know, leaving all these messages and comments in the Google document we were using. So we supported each other through all of that. Didn't hear anything from Melody. And then the deadline came and went, and we heard nothing. And we'd been not just commenting in the Google document, we'd been emailing her, and I did as well. So it was a couple of us who were emailing. So emailing Melody, emailing her team. I wrote her on Instagram directly, didn't hear anything. The Instagram one I wasn't too surprised about because I know she probably gets a lot of messages from people. And then when we finally did hear from her, it was because I wrote a public comment on a post that she'd released asking if she could please check the Google document because we hadn't heard from her and the deadline had already passed. So I hate it when you almost feel like you have to publicly shame someone by, you know, putting that comment out there and then they do what they were meant to do. And, you know, life gets in the way. We get busy. Things happen. I've had that with the Cosmo cardigan that, you know, I didn't finish it on time. The fact that the test knit was also kind of put on hold and there was a bit of stopping and starting. But the biggest thing for me was the communication that was there. It was the fact that, you know, something big had happened in the designer's life But she told us really quickly, like quicker than I would have even expected. I was very shocked at how quickly she let us know. Shocked in a good way, like, thank you. It really showed that she appreciated our time that we were kind of committing to this project. And she told us and was like, look, I have to like put it on hold. And she kept us in the loop the whole time. And that's all I'm kind of asking for. Not constant communication, but kind of just letting us know, look, I have to put this test on hold or I have to cancel it. I've had that before with Fiber Tales, that she had to cancel a test knit. Fine. But she let us know plenty of time. There wasn't the stress of the deadline coming up and it passing and us being like, what do we do? What do we do? And some people chose to just finish knitting the socks as they were. It's just they didn't turn out how they were meant to turn out. They were much bigger and everything. And it was just so much stress. And I know quite a few people might be kind of like, who cares, you know, like you just put the project aside, you work on something else. But the kind of person I am, I put a lot of pressure on myself. So when something doesn't go to plan, and so when the deadline had passed and we hadn't heard from Melody, I had assumed I'd done something wrong. Even though every like logical thing was kind of saying like, look, you did your best, she just hasn't responded. I still kind of went, yeah, but maybe she told us something and we all missed it, and you know, maybe we're emailing her in the wrong places and things like that. And I just kind of assumed, you know, I was doing something wrong. So then when we finally heard from her and she told us, oh, whoops, sorry, like the gauge was wrong. This is what it should be. I've remeasured it. And she fixed not every mistake we'd found, but she'd fixed some of the big ones, which meant I could finish knitting the socks. And I made some of my own choices because I was just like, I need these socks done. The stress of that test knit kind of impacted the Cosmo Cardigan test knit, the Pippin sweater test knit I was doing. And it was just kind of impacted my whole like happiness at the time because it was so stressful. And the biggest thing that it kind of comes down to is she then told us, because the post she had put on Instagram was that she'd moved and she'd done like this reel talking, like showing her house off and everything. And I completely get it. Moving is really stressful. I have done it many times. It's not fun. It never has been. So I get that, but it was the lack of communication that was really frustrating because it was such a short test knit. In my mind, I was like, but surely you knew you were moving, or, you know, you knew that was coming up. And then when you do get told, shouldn't one of the first things be like, oh crap, I'm just going to let them know, like, no stress about the deadline. I'm moving. I've got no time, you know, don't stress about getting these socks done. We'll push the deadline back. But she didn't let us know, and we kind of had to do so much work to hunt her down, and we were working for her. We were doing this for her. And it was just the lack of communication, and in some ways it was just really disrespectful of our time because we were all trying to work together to help each other out and support each other. And I've heard from other designers test knitting isn't easy. It demands a lot of your time. And I know some test knitters can be really nasty about things. But for the most part, you know, my experience has been that most people are quite nice about it. And all we ask is like that you actually understand how much work goes into it from our perspective as well, with all the knitting and everything and trying to make sure we're paying attention to things and spotting mistakes. And then to not get any sort of contact at all during that time, and the deadline passes and we still haven't heard anything from the designer, that's not okay. And the only thing that would have made it okay is if she just told us, like, she didn't even have to give a reason, just told us, sorry, I'm not going to be available until at least, you know, mid-September or something. And we could have all just relaxed and kept going, or said, sorry, I need to drop out of the test because I don't have the time. And part of me was also a bit annoyed of like, you didn't have time to tell us, like, things were stressful and, you know, you were struggling. But you had enough time to post a reel about your new house. For me, that was just a disrespectful thing again of like priorities. That it was more important to share that than it was to communicate with your test knitters. I was like, that literally was a slap in the face, and is the main reason that I'm now really considering about whether this is a design I want to continue to support. I also spent a lot of time thinking about, do I even want to talk about this in the video? But for me, it was just, I'd feel really crappy just coming on and being like, yeah, I made these socks and, you know, it wasn't the best testing experience, but it was fine. I was like, no, it was really awful. It was really stressful and it shouldn't be that way. And it didn't take a lot to prevent it from being that way. And the big thing for me is I never expect people to be perfect. We make mistakes. Life happens. It's, you know, you can never predict when something is going to happen. Typically with moving house, it is something you know, but sometimes it does just all of a sudden happen and it's like, no, you got to move now. But for me, it's never about people being perfect. I'm all for people making mistakes. That's okay. What matters to me is how you handle things after you've made a mistake and someone has, you know, said something about it. Are you going to acknowledge that you screwed up? If you did actually screw up, sometimes people are just nasty. But you know you've made a mistake. Are you going to own up to it? And are you going to actually apologize without then kind of defending why it happened? It's like, okay, that's fine. But if you really, for me, it's just, if you really apologize, that means more to me than not having made the mistake in the first place. Because that to me shows you're someone that really cares about your actions, your choices, about other people and things like that. And I think it also just takes away, for anyone who suffers from anxiety, I think it can take that pressure away from having to be perfect. Because you live your life, and if you screw up, it's all just about communicating how you actually care and that you didn't mean to do it. Anyway, so it's just a really hard thing of, I really love Melody's designs and her videos and things like that. So it's just a bit heartbreaking to have had this experience on top of what happened with the forager, of the sizing just being completely wrong and it's still not being fixed, and not having heard anything back since they've acknowledged there was a mistake. And it wasn't Melody, it was her team, which is fine, you know. If you're busy, you have a team. Like, that's, like, if you did the job, in my opinion. But so it's just, I don't know if I can keep knitting her patterns. And until the pattern isn't out for these socks, I don't know if it ever will be. I've contacted her again to give my feedback on the whole thing, and I was honest. While professional, but I was kind of like, it literally felt like you didn't respect your test knitters. And that's what it felt like. I'm not trying to be rude, I'm just trying to be honest here. And haven't heard anything back from the team, and haven't seen a post about the socks, so I don't know if they're ever going to come out. Which would be a shame, because I think they are really lovely, but there are still, with how, like, where the pattern is at right now, it still needs some fixing, but things that are relatively easy to do, in my opinion. So I'm thinking about contacting them one more time and kind of just being like, please, a response. And in some ways it's also, you know, you can be as nasty and rude as you want to me, but don't you dare do it to other people. That's when I get really, like, not necessarily defensive, but I'm more likely to stand up for other people than I am to stand up for myself. So because there are other test knitters involved, it makes it easier for me to say something about it. But it's also typically you do a test knit and you get a pattern for free. Yeah, we didn't get anything, or at least I didn't. Maybe other test knitters did, maybe I didn't because of how I reacted. But like I said, I really did try to keep it professional and just kind of express how I felt, how everything went, and being honest while also not being mean and cruel. So that's why that pattern, not so happy. Love the socks though. So maybe I'll just have to, you know, knit another pair to be able to move on from all of that. But like I said, I just wanted to be honest about everything that happened, and hopefully they come out in the future because they are nice. But like I said, something needs to change for me, because otherwise I think I can't keep supporting her, because it's just, I was really excited to be test knitting for her, and then that experience was just like, wow. One bad experience with the forager, and this is even worse. Anyway. The other finished project that I have, on a happier note again, is what I started before I left for the UK back in September. So this is the Easy Peasy Bandana. It's a free knitting pattern, and it's one of those, like, I made mine a bit bigger, but it's one of those like little shawl scarf things that are quite in right now. Because you've got like the Sophie shawl, is that the small one? Or is it the scarf? I think it's the shawl is the small one. And then I know the Knit Pearl Girl has like the Pippin scarf set and things like that. So I know these things are quite popular. But obviously this is quite bigger than the other one. But you could easily modify this to be like the Sophie scarf for a shawl, for example, because in my opinion, it's not a pattern I'd pay for because it's not hard. Like I said, you can just modify this one and it could be exactly the same. Anyway, no judgment if someone does buy it. I just don't think it's money I would spend on that pattern. But yeah, so free knitting pattern, you start on one end and you just increase on one side. It is worked in stockinette, so you do have to purl the wrong side, but you can easily just do garter. And yeah, then when you reach the length and width you'd like, you start to then decrease and then cast off the last 2 stitches. And the yarn I used is from Knitting for Olive. I think it's called Double Soft Merino. Really fluffy yarn and really soft, but discontinued. So I think you can't really get it anymore. Some websites still have it, typically for a discounted price because it's discontinued. And I used 2 skeins to make this. So what I did is I kept increasing until I reached a point where I was like, I can't knit 2 more rows out of the yarn that I've left. That's when I started decreasing and then eventually used the second skein once I needed it. And had a little bit left over at the end, but I'll show you what I did with that in just a little bit. But yeah, so the yarn is really soft and lovely. I know it pills quite badly in garments and things. I wonder if that's why it's been discontinued. But for something like this, I'm like, it's not going to get that much wear. Like, as in like friction wear. So I think it will be fine. And yeah, it was a really lovely project. And I ended up finishing it as we were kind of like landing back in Germany. But finished it before we had actually landed. And I was like, oh, I have a little bit of yarn left over. But also, I need to knit on something else. I didn't have anything else with me. I was like, what do I do? So I decided just to knit like a little square. Well, all I did was the yarn I had left over, I kind of divided it up to see like where is the middle, put a little knot in there. Started I think with 3 stitches and then just always increased on one side on every row, and it's just garter stitch. But yeah, so increased, knit to the end, turned, increased, knit to the end, turned, and just kept doing that until I reached the point where I was like, okay, that knot's pretty close, not going to be able to get another row out of it, let's start decreasing. So then I decreased, knit to the end, decreased, knit to the end, until I had 3 stitches left, bound those off, and ta-da! Have a beautiful squishy square. No like real plan for it. I'm like, it can be a coaster, it can also just be something really nice to have like on a pin board and things like that. And I'm like, it's going to be used for something. And it was just nice to use up all the yarn because I think I had like this much left at the end, and that was like enough just to be put into my scrappy bag of ends that I'm going to send to Hedgehog Fibers eventually. And I have 2 more colours of this yarn. And 2 skeins of each of those colours, so I can make 2 more, which I might do for presents because it was quite a nice knit. Perfect for travelling, because you didn't really need to look at the pattern. Because I made mine longer and wider than the knitting pattern I think suggested, but that's because I wanted to use as much yarn as possible. And yeah, like I said, you can then modify it, do garter stitch if you don't want to have to purl. You can easily add an I-cord if you want something like the Sophie shawl. You can also, you know, not increase as quickly if you want it to be that kind of longer shape like the Sophie shawl. So I think it's really nice that it's a free pattern. There's also a bigger one now, which I think is the Easy Peasy shawl, maybe. Yeah, free, which is always really nice. So those are all the finished objects, but I have two other things to show that I didn't knit, but I wanted to share anyway. The first one is this little chicken. So my mum made this. My mum knitted this little chicken for me. So my parents back in September were in Perth in Australia, where my brother lives with his family. And my parents sent me a parcel here to where I live in Germany. It's not easy sending things from Dubai, obviously closer, but it's a complicated system over there with sending things. So they sent me the parcel from Australia, and included some goodies from like food things and snacks from Australia as well. And yeah, my mum had made this little chicken, and I have the knitting pattern as well. So I really want to make my own because it's so cute. I love it. Imagine just like a load of little chickens. And the other thing my mum had made for me was a jumper. Isn't it beautiful? So it's two patterns combined. The pattern and motif you can see here is from the UNICEF jumper by Knitting for Olive, which is a kid sweater. So my mum had knitted that for my niece, and I was like, I want it too. So she took the chart and added it to a different jumper. And the jumper, I can't remember the name, but I'll make sure to include it, is by Isabel Kramer. And the beautiful thing about it is it has like brioche at the end for the ribbing, and it's so squishy and beautiful. And the yarn is Uth yarn. The colour green. The green one I know is called pistachio, and it looks like pistachio, and it looks amazing. But yeah, so my mum made me this jumper. And you know, for someone who knits, I know how much effort and time and stuff goes into this. And it's then just so nice that someone has done that for me, especially because I like long sleeves and I need a longer body. So it's then just like extra appreciated that someone took the time to make me this. So nice. Love it. So I'll be wearing that in a future podcast episode because it's amazing. That is all my finished objects. So like I said, it's not that many. And now what I have on my needles. I'll start with like older projects I've shared before, but there are a lot of new projects in this video, so be prepared. The first old project is the Laulu Shawl by Sari Nordlund, which I think I've only shared like once before, and I think I was like here. So I think I'd like work the first chart or something like that and then just put it on hold for a while. And I've just slowly been working on it every now and then. And similar to the Easy Peasy bandana, I tried to do it that once I was close to finishing my first skein of yarn, that's when I started doing the decreases. Now, if you can see the end here, I'm actually quite a ways away from where I started the decreases when I started my second ball. And that's because you have to work like a certain number of rows of a certain chart as you're increasing before you can switch to decreasing. So I made the choice. I was like, I'd rather just use the 2 skeins I have of this yarn. Well, I have 4 skeins of the yarn. So let's go with that. I have 4 skeins of this yarn. I thought I only had 2, but before I did the decreases, I found I had 4 in total. And I was like, either I make it bigger, which I didn't want to do. I wanted to be relatively small. And I was like, well, if I make it bigger by 1 more repeat of that chart, then I would probably need a bit of the 3rd skein, which is frustrating. I was like, now I'm going to only need the 2 skeins and I'm going to have a little bit left over of my 2nd skein, which I'm fine with because of the next project I'm going to show you. But yeah, so I'm on the decreases now. I'm on my 2nd skein of the yarn, and this is Sugar Baby Alpaca by Will and the Gang. And I haven't like used too much yet of my 2nd skein, so there will definitely be some left over, but you know, I'm getting there slowly but surely, and the rows are getting obviously shorter, so it's all getting quicker. And it's just a really beautiful cable and lace design, but it does mean it's not the easiest to kind of just like sit down on and work on. because you need to look at the charts. So it really is something that I have to sit down at like my dining room table to be able to work on this properly, which is fine. It just means it goes quite slowly. And the other 2 skeins that I'll have left over at the end, I was like, I can make another one and just give it as a present, because I think that would be a really beautiful present. And it's 100% alpaca, so it's warm and very soft. So that's the first one I've been making progress on. And like I said, it's just been like, since the last time I shared it, which was months ago now, I've just slowly always worked like a couple of rows, and so it's slowly grown, and now it's hopefully going to be done sooner rather than later, hopefully still this year. And any yarn that's left over will go into this project. So this I've shared like once before, and these, like, I've got this big project bag, really beautiful project bag, which contains all of the like DK and worsted weight scraps that I have, where I'm happy for them to go into this project. Because like some of them I'm like, no, I cannot put you into this project, it has to be something else. Especially if I've got a lot of yarn left, then I'm not always a big fan of putting it into just a scrappy project. But this is the Battenberg Blanket, where you crochet a load of squares. I'll show you these ones. And like a Battenberg cake, you kind of just alternate the colours. And I've decided to buy yarn for this project and not just use scraps, because I'll have one main colour and then the contrasting colour will just be my scraps. So these are my main colour squares. I haven't got many of them yet. These I've woven in the ends. I just need to block these. And the yarn is Peruvian Highland Wool by Filcolana in the colour Marzipan. So whenever I've ordered some yarn for a different project, I've occasionally put in like 1 or 2 skeins of this yarn. And I have 4 in total now, I think. And I'm going to try and work through those before I buy more. I've calculated roughly how many squares I need to make the blanket size that I want. And I'm probably going to need a lot more of this yarn, but I was like, let's just use this up first. And then we'll start buying more, because then I'll get an idea of how many squares can I get out of a skein. And then slowly be able to calculate it that way. Plus, it means I don't have to store as much of the like yarn in skein form right now. But yeah, so that's my like main colour. And then I have like this bag of squares that I have finished, but I need to weave in the ends and block them. But I've now also started recently, and this is why I'm sharing it, put all my blocked finished squares into this box. So I don't have that many yet. But you know, I've got 2 smallish stacks. And the reason that I'm blocking them before I put the whole blanket together is because I'm using DK and worsted weight yarn. So the different weight means that some squares are a bit smaller, some are a bit bigger, and by blocking them first, I get them to roughly the same measurements. So once the ends are woven in, and once they're washed and blocked, they then go in here. That way I can hopefully start crocheting the blanket together soon, because I don't want to wait until right at the end. I want to start putting it together as I'm working on it. So like I said, I've got a bag of squares where I need to weave in the ends. I've only got a couple where I'm ready to block them. But yarn wise, just to kind of give you an overview of what goes in here. This yarn is by West Yorkshire Spinners and is left over from like a baby kimono that I made. This is the yarn I used for my mum's Humleby shawl, which was left over. And this is one where I haven't made a square with it yet, but I might do 1 or 2, and the rest I might put back in my stash because there's still a decent amount left. And I have other yarn that's really similar, like the same sort of base, and I could use them together in a project because this is a lot for a scrappy project. That one's just a bit of a random yarn I had left over from a swatch. This is De Rare Natura Gilead, which I used for my woodland cardigan. This was left over from the Spice cardigan I made as a present. There's yarn left over from the September sweat and the Sunday socks I made as a present. So it really is just like any yarn that sort of fits the bill of like being DK worsted weight. And I'm going to try, I still have a bit of room in here, but I'm going to try and work through that before adding more bits in here. There are other yarns that would fit into this project, but I'm just going to try and focus on this so I don't become completely overwhelmed with having like so many yarns to work with. So I keep my scraps somewhere else. Sometimes sorted by weight, sometimes they're just in there for a while until I get a chance to sort them. And I'll then, once I've worked through some of these, start pulling them into this project, especially once I've decided like it's not enough for using it for anything else, then it will go in here. Yeah, so hopefully I'll be able to fill this box slowly, but I also ideally want to start blocking some of my main colour squares so I can start crocheting it together. So the next time I share it will be when I've actually started joining the squares together, because otherwise I think there's no point. The next one is also one you've seen before. Lost this game. So this is the jumper I'd like to try and finish before the end of the year. This was a kit from Juleskog, and the jumper is called Juleskog Genser. And it has these beautiful little trees. And I love it so much. I don't think you can see the main colour very well. It looks black in this light right now. But it's a dark, foresty kind of green. And I have finally finished the colourwork chart. And I've actually split for sleeves and started working on the body. But I don't have like that much of it knit up yet. It's slow going. I also have a very small cable right now on the body, because this yarn's quite sticky, and I found that a longer cable, the stitches just weren't sliding well enough, so I've put it on a smaller cable, and that helps things move along quicker. And yeah, so I just need to do stockinette body for an age, ribbing, and then I can do the 2 sleeves, and I still need to sew down the folded collar as well. But one of the main reasons I wanted to share this project is because I was really struggling with the colour work, because it just wasn't the most fun with the chart and the long floats. Especially I saw that at the end you've got like 1 stitch in the white and then a really long time before you have another one, so long floats. Which is fine, I normally just, you know, catch my floats, no big deal. But it just really wasn't... It just wasn't that enjoyable, especially when you had to work increases in a colourwork round as well. It just wasn't fun. And I finally decided... Ooh, just checking if I've lost a stitch. Nope, we're good. And I finally decided to try something different. So I was watching one of Heather and Hops's videos where she talked about, and she's talked about it quite a few times, a method called ladder back jacquard. And I finally tried it. I wish I had tried it sooner. I don't know why I was being so stubborn about it, because I was always just like, oh, I just catch my floats, that's fine. But this makes it so much easier. There's a video I'll link below that I used to work it up, but just so you can kind of see it. So this is the like ladder back jacquard stitch that runs down here. And it is just like catching floats normally, but you've created this extra stitch that sits at the back of your work. So what you do is you do like a leaning increase, which means that stitch kind of sits at the back, and to ensure that it keeps sitting at the back like this, is when you go to work that stitch in the contrast color, you first bring your main strand, like your main colored strand, to the front of your work, knit the contrast color as normal, and then the main color strand goes to the back. And that just ensures that that stitch like sits behind the work, just like this. And then when you're done with it and you don't need it anymore, you just decrease in a way. You probably want to do knit together. I think that's what I did. And then that contrast color stitch sits behind the main color stitch, and then done, sorted. And I specifically put it like in between the trees, because that's where I was going to have the longest floats. And it just made the whole thing so much quicker and easier. So yeah, that's my recommendation for you. If you've been wondering, should I try it? Shouldn't I try it? Really, give it a try. Do it. It's so worth it in my opinion. And even though you've added like extra stitches, which means you kind of have more knitting to do in some ways, it's like catching floats, but way easier. And you can put them wherever you want in your work and decrease whenever you want and get rid of them and set a new one whenever you want. So it's like catching your floats. You choose where you do it. Except you can actually stack these, whereas with catching floats, you should never stack. Yeah, so highly recommend that. Really give it a go. I wish I'd done it sooner. Another old project where I can't believe I'm actually going to talk about it. I never thought I'd get anywhere close to having anything to say about this project. So this is Make 9 related, where I've got 3, I talked about previously, 3 things that I'd like to try and get finished for my Make 9 before the end of the year. The Forager, the Satsuki, and the Sparky. And I'd said, let's finish the Forager first, easy peasy project, after all the stress and drama. And then out of the Satsuki and the Sparky, I was like, well, Sparky's going to be easier than the Satsuki, because even though it's all over colour work, it's not too bad. But the Satsuki's worked flat for such a long time, I was like, ugh, it's just not going to happen this year. And, well, apparently after I said that, I was like, no, how dare I tell myself I can't do this? And I've made a decent amount of progress on the Satsuki. I can't believe it. So last time I shared it, I literally had like, of the back piece, I had like this much. And it was just, worked back and forth flat. And then eventually you had some increases for sleeve shaping. And then you had to pick up stitches at the front and then join it at the neck. And then eventually once you've done like the cable at the front, which is like the fun part of the sweater, which I was really looking forward to. And I think it's turned out really well with this yarn. You join in the round, which I've now done. So now it's just easy breezy knitting. So now it's kind of, like with the Forager, where it's just like stockinette, and you just go knit a normal kind of jumper. That's where I'm at now. So just need to work on the body, do the 2 sleeves, and add the neckband. So my plan is to knit until one of these 2 skeins of yarn runs out. I don't know which one it's going to be. And then knit the neckband before I pick up either the sleeves or continue with the body. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, I kind of can't believe I've made progress on this. I really didn't think that was going to happen this year, so I kind of surprised myself, which is sort of a funny thing to say. And I really started to enjoy that because, I don't know, there was just something where I was like, okay, you're getting really close now with the back piece, which was the hard one because you've got the most stitches, where you're working flat, and it just reached a point where I was like, you don't have too much longer to go before you need to do some increasing, and that will change it up a bit. And it also helped that I was talking to my mum while working on the back piece, and that really helped me breeze through it. I always have that. And I often forget that when I have a project where I'm struggling to knit on a particular section, I should just call someone up and be like, want to catch up because I need help getting through this knitting experience. So yeah, that's the Satsuki, and hopefully I can still get that done before the end of the year. We'll see. It's funny because I've got a lot of projects now where I got past doing the yoke, where like challenging yokes for me, not like hard technique wise, challenging from like a mental point of view, where I was like, this is so frustrating, I don't want to keep doing this. So it's just really nice to now have a lot of projects where I'm like, oh, you just got to do stockinette body, nothing special here, or stockinette sleeves, nothing special here. So it's quite nice. And here's another one. This is a new project I haven't shared in a podcast. I did talk about casting it on, but I hadn't shared it yet. I shared like a swatch. So this is a pre-knit that I'm doing. So unlike a test knit, the pattern doesn't need testing. It's just so that when people look it up on Ravelry after it's released, they can see a couple of pictures and just see what yarn people are using and things like that. So it's just like a promotional thing, really. But I think the pattern isn't out yet, even though I think it was meant to be out at the end of October. So don't know what's happening there. I'm sure it will come out eventually. but this is the Saglan Pullover by Ailbíona McLochlainn, and almost impossible to see anything. This way. So it's a very dark green. It is a different green to this one. You can't see either. So I'll have to share this off again in the future. But like I said, it's a very, very dark green. I'm using Nordlund held double for this, and it's working up beautifully. The only problem is this Nordlund feels like you're working with air. So yarn-wise, it's like not the most pleasant knitting experience, but it's better now that I'm just working in the round, because the whole like amazing thing about this jumper is the like sleeve construction. And you're not going to be able to see anything, and I'll share it off again in the future, but it's not a raglan, it's not like a circular yoke, it's like a, I have to look it up again what it is, but it's just beautiful with how you work it, and made it really interesting. But it also meant you had to start flat before you could join in the round, so that took a while. And especially working flat with this yarn, when you had to increase on like a purl side row, it was so hard not to rip the yarn. So it hasn't been the most fun at the beginning, but now, and especially like once I joined in the round, it was really easy to get it to knit on this. And yeah, I've split for sleeves, but I just haven't really knit that much of the body yet. But really enjoying it and really want to keep working on it, but it's something that's just, it's gonna have to wait a little while. You'll see in my next podcast episode, I've got one project that I mainly need to focus on. And then everything else is kind of more just like self-imposed deadlines, but this one project is like a proper deadline. So can't spend as much time on that one as I'd like, but hopefully soon. Another new project, which is so hard to show off, is in here. This is the, I think it's called the Amina Cowl. It's from the Worsted book by Amy of Ailbíona. And this is how much I have of it, so you'll be able to see like all these different colours. And I'm using Plötulopi by Istex, just like scraps and bits that I had, and it's knit in the round, but it's in tarja colour work, which means you don't actually work in the round because you're still working flat, so you have purl rows, but you just do something like at the beginning of the round. That's not the beginning of the round, somewhere else. You have to work this like technique of like locking in the round, and then you work a wrong side. It's not the most pleasant knitting experience, I have to say. But I've never done intarsia in the round. I've only done it like flat, which is traditional. And so I really wanted to give it a go, and I was like, a cowl isn't too big, and I was like, I'll use up some funky colours of Plötulopi that I've got, because I've got a black winter coat, like jacket. So I thought this could be quite fun, it'll be very warm. Is you just look at this mess. And this is the thing with intarsia, that for every colour that you work, you need a separate strand, because it has stripes and other like colour work motifs and stuff. It's just a lot of yarn attached at one time. And it's just not the most fun and pleasant knitting experience, and I just really need to spend some time to like sort out my little balls of yarn and maybe put like rubber bands or hair ties around them to keep them really separate so they don't unravel. And I think I'm only ever going to show this off again once I'm done with the intarsia and I'm just back to these stripes here, which I work just normally in the round, because I think it's just going to be too much of a pain to show. Even this, you're not going to see much, but so hopefully once I get through that intarsia, I can show that off better, and hopefully it actually, worked out, because right now it's just, it's tricky, and it's really testing my patience. 2 more projects, and then we're done. This first one is another blanket. So I have a fingering weight, I have a blanket that uses fingering weight scraps, which is my Happy Scrappy blanket, but it's fingering weight held double, so it's beautiful, but you can't see like each colour as well. And I kind of have wanted to make either a Cozy Memories blanket is the first one I'd ever heard of, but then I heard that there's the Coziest Memory, which is free, so I was like, I'll go for the free one, thanks. And so it's just little squares that you knit up in a single colour and fingering weight. You can also go bigger yarn, thicker yarn, bigger needles. And I thought, well, I have plenty of scraps left over from projects where I've used yarn by the Fiber Fox. And it's also yarn, like, it's a dyer where I have a lot more yarn, and it's somewhere I'll always be producing scraps. So I thought, let's do a Fiber Fox scrappy blanket. So these 3 colours, well, everything I'm about to show you is the Fiber Fox. So this colour here is called Flax, which I used in my Cozy Classic Raglan for like cuffs and ribbing and stuff. This is Maleficent, which I used for my Aros sweater by Petite Knit. And this is the Fellowship, which I used as the main colour for my Cozy Classic Raglan. So these are the 3 squares I have right now. And just to kind of show you what yarn I've got in here right now, it's not all the Fiber Fox scraps I have, but it's kind of what I have here right now, and there's other projects I'll hopefully finish soon, and hopefully I can make it to Austria at some point to be able to bring over the rest so I can, you know, put it in this blanket. So this here, I think the colour's Obsidian, and it's the baby camel base, which I use for my Exordium shawl. This is more of the Flax, which I already mentioned. More of the Maleficent, which I already mentioned. This is a colour where I can't remember the name, but it's a Pokemon name. It should be just enough for a square. And I use that in my Aros sweater as well. This is Fairy Godmothers, which I used for the school run mittens, where I've got leftovers. 2 balls of that. One of them has gone into, I think, my Happy Scrappy blanket, and this one into this one, obviously. This is not a sock yarn. This is, all the other ones were, well, sort of. This is a Merino Singles. This is the colour Sansa, which I used for my Lotus Petal top. This colour is called January Blues, I think, and is on the Plumpy base, which is my favourite, which I used to make a pair of socks. And this is the latest kind of one that I've included, which is Frosted Sea Glass, which I used for my Fruit Alstad. So a variety of different colours, but not enough right now to be able to like really make some progress on this blanket. And I am planning on like making multiple squares and colours. It's not just going to be one square in each colour, but I do kind of, I don't want all the starting colours to be clustered together at the beginning, so just need to wait a while and finish some other things. Speaking of other things, the last project is also in Georgie's yarn, and I picked up this yarn when I went to see her back in end of September, beginning of October. And I knew I wanted to get yarn for this project because I wanted to make them for a while. And these are the Hibernation house socks by Lindsay Fowler. So I haven't got much yet. It's just the beginning of the cuff. But you use a fingering weight, sock yarn, and a Suri alpaca held together. But just for the cuff. The rest of the sock is just done in the sock yarn. And I'm using on her Plumpy base. This is the colour Poison, Suri Alpaca base, this is the colour Winter Solstice. So it is quite a light colour, but it's got like those purple tones and everything in there as well. And it's just so squishy. And yeah, I haven't worked on it in quite a while now, but it's really lovely and will make really cozy house socks. And what did I want to say? Yeah, there'll be yarn left over at the end. I know there will be. And this is another one that can then go in the blanket. The Suri alpaca I'll use for something else. But yeah, and I was like, well, I never really work with purple. So it's quite nice to have a project where I'm knitting something up in purple. But it's also then nice to have purple for that blanket, because that will be a completely different colour. I had like that pink Maleficent one, which has some purple. But like purple, really never knit with. I don't know why. I really like purple. I like all colours. So yeah, so that's just the beginning of that project, and that will just be a slow going one. I'm in no rush to finish those. So that's all the projects I'm going to share today. And that's it really. Like there's some life stuff I want to talk about. There's some like Christmas, January time videos I want to talk about, but I'll probably leave that for a future video. Just get this one done, get this one out. Just so I can kind of get back into my usual sort of routine with filming. And I hope you're all doing well. I hope you did enjoy this video, even though there was some kind of more sad stuff at the beginning. Yeah, so I will see you next time. Bye!